Okay, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you are able to hear me, and hopefully the stream is going to, well, hopefully it is up and running, and hopefully it is going to stay up and running. It would appear that having to restart devices is the way to get things fixed, but also they only seem to want to not work when it's time to give a class, so that's just the way technology works. Please can you put a thumbs up in chat if you can hear me? Just that I know that all is hopefully a-okay and we can get tonight's class started. Okay, so I'm just gonna hang on for a moment or two just to make sure that there are some thumbs up in chat, so hopefully you can hear me. Okay, great. Someone can hear me, so I'm going to get started with tonight's lecture. But before we actually get started with tonight's lecture, there are two announcements that need to be made, and we're going to do this democratically. So there is good news, and there is bad news. So the democratic part about this is, which would you like to hear first? And the one that gets the most votes, we'll do that one first. Bad news. Okay, so there's one vote for bad news. Anyone else care to vote so that we can... Good news, bad news, bad news. At the moment, bad news is winning. Okay, so I'm going to take it now, since as there's only 5 concurrent viewers in the stream, that the majority have voted for bad news. So the bad news is as follows. And another person voted for bad news. So it's definitely bad news first. So the bad news is as follows. Prof van der Haar has informed me that the Turnitin services that are supposed to be available to the Academy are down, which means your research or your mini research assignments have not been put through Turnitin, which means I actually can't give you your marks back for them. So as soon as they've been run through Turnitin, I've been given the A-OK and the go-ahead, I can then give you back your miniature research assignments as well as your marks. Until such time as they've been run through Turnitin, I can't give you back your marks. But that's where the good news comes in. So as you may recall from last week's lecture, in last week's lecture, I told you that I'm going to extend the due date for the main research project 1 week, from the due date of the original due date. That due date would have been, the original due date was the 6th of May, and that due date would have put it squarely on the 13th of May. There is just one minor problem with that particular date, and the problem is that the 13th of May is a public holiday. In fact, it is a complete long weekend with that date being a long weekend. Oh, I'm not exactly sure if it's a long weekend, but because that date was the date that was supposed to be for your research project to be handed in, I have then instead elected to move it to the following week, which if you were to now go onto Eve, you will note that the research project practical is now up on Eve, reflecting the final due date. So unfortunately, after this point, I can't accept any of your main research projects, so please do submit your final research project on or before the 18th of May, so that I then have ample time to actually mark them, have them run through Turnitin, and get you back your marks, hopefully in the block week, before exam time starts, so you have ample time to prepare for the exam. Okay, so that is the good news, and I will then obviously get you your marks for your mini research project as soon as I'm able to, i.e. after the Turnitin results have come back. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, please do post them in the chat or post them in the Discord server. If there is anything that you are unclear about in the research project, please do contact me as soon as possible to arrange a consultation, so that we can iron out any problems that you might have. So please do that as soon as possible so that you can get as much time into your research project as possible. Please do bear in mind that this does count 70% of the marks for this course. So failing the research project could effectively not allow you entrance into the exam. So please do make sure that you put adequate time into the main research project. Okay, back on topic. The topic being tonight's lecture. So tonight's lecture is going to be another supplemental set of lecture slides, which means you only really need to study the content presented in the lecture slides and the video of this lecture once it's uploaded and online. As you know, once the live stream is concluded, it gets processed by YouTube and then is put online for you to watch anytime you want. So the content for tonight's lecture is what you need to study for the exam. There's no link to a textbook or anything you need to actually prepare from a textbook. So it's all in the lecture slides. So tonight we're going to talk about product development. And in talking about product development, we've got to actually talk about what a product is and understanding how we can then go about the process of getting a good product and then being able to produce the product in such a way that the product is well received, and also that we can then iterate on the product or improve on the product after its original release. You can find that there are many products out there that the same product with minor iteration has been released year after year, decade after decade, and people still want them and use them because they are solid, well-designed products that are themselves useful and then warrant people wanting to get replacements of them as time goes on. But we're also going to talk about how we can do this entire process as efficiently as possible using a philosophy called running lean, and how we can go from effectively not having a product to producing a product using what is called lean startup philosophy. And in order for us to do this, we're going to be talking about the role of the customer in the actual development process. Because at the end of the day, when you produce a product, you're producing it to sell it to someone. That someone is the customer. So why not involve the customer in the process of development so that you can make the most tailor-made, specific, and useful product for the customer so that there really won't be any doubts whether or not the customer will actually want or need your product. And then we'll apply this lean startup philosophy to product development. So tonight's lecture is not going to be a long lecture, so that's another bit of good news. But that's why I want to encourage you, if you do have questions about the content, if you have questions about some of the diagrams, because most of tonight's lecture is not going to be walls of text and stuff like that. It's going to be me talking about processes, me talking over some kind of a diagram. So if you do have questions, please drop them and we'll talk about it. Okay, so let's talk about product development. So first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what is a product in terms of e-commerce or e-business, as we're now talking about this whole sphere of e-business encompassing e-commerce and everything about it. So we need to figure out what is a good product. And now a product can mean many different things. A product can be a physical, tangible item like a pair of sneakers that you sell to someone, and they obviously buy the product, give you money in exchange. Thus, e-commerce is handled. But a product can be other things as well. A product can be the actual piece of software that you're using to do something. It could be the website, or more specifically, the web application that does certain things. Normally, a product has some kind of an application to it. You buy something for a particular purpose. You buy sneakers to wear them so you don't hurt your feet while you're out running or walking or doing whatever. You buy sneakers because they look good, or you want to have comfort, those kind of things. So a product needs to have some kind of a purpose in mind. So let's look at some mobile products. So this is a list of the most downloaded applications on mobile devices from March of 2021. So this is as recent as I could find. Now, if we look at it, this is broken up into 3 different categories. First being overall downloads, which is absolutely everything that is done on mobile platforms. And then we've got things on the Apple App Store and things off of the Google Play Store. And based on these download numbers, we can see which are the most popular apps across these different platforms. So let's just look at the overall downloads to get started. So you'll note that the majority of apps here are applications that are social in nature. Human beings being social creatures, they want to connect and interact with one another. You've got things like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, Snapchat, etc. So you can see there that the majority of people who are going to be making use of these online mobile applications are doing so from a social perspective. Now, does that necessarily make them the best kind of apps to produce, social media applications and things like that? Well, not necessarily, because most of these are run by giant corporations. We've got things like Facebook, who's actually got control of Instagram and WhatsApp, and because of that, they sort of drive an ecosystem and attempt to monopolize on those kind of products. Now let's go and look at something a little bit different. So not apps that you can download for your phone, but instead let's just look at straight up web pages. So this comes from a list of the top 100 websites as of January 2021, and you'll note that the most visited web page on perhaps the planet is Wikipedia. So here's that's a very interesting statement that you've made there. So the statement is, I thought people said they are done with WhatsApp. Now, you know, this is kind of a very good example of how a minority can make a lot of noise. Now, I'm assuming you're alluding to the fact that WhatsApp, and by extension the Facebook Corporation, decided they were going to update their terms of service and make it mandatory for you to accept those terms of service. Now, this was supposed to happen back in February. And when it was explored, the terms of service that they wanted to change was actually going to enable the WhatsApp Messenger to have greater access to your device and be able to gain access to things like your unique device identifiers, as well as other information off of your device. So naturally, a lot of people took offense to this because they felt that they were being bullied into accepting these terms of service, or else they had to physically remove WhatsApp from their device. And in this time, a lot of prominent people in social media spheres latched onto the story and started explaining the process, explaining the problems, explaining all these kind of things. And it kind of gained this kind of fever pitch to it, where people were just losing their minds about it and what was happening. And what this forced was, it forced a lot of people to reevaluate their position in WhatsApp. Did they need WhatsApp as a messenger? Did they need it to communicate with people? And how much did they value their privacy in actually using WhatsApp? So from this point onward, a lot of people decided, well, if we value our privacy, we're not going to make use of WhatsApp, because already Facebook is, every year there's something with Facebook where there's some kind of a data breach, they leak more information, they're selling your data en masse, and generally people are not happy with them. But also, another perspective on all of this is that people generally also don't care. A lot of people just are ignorant, and they don't know what those terms of service are. They didn't read what the terms of service are. They don't know what the wording in the terms of service actually mean as to how it pertains to your information on your device and how that will affect your privacy and the information that might be then exposed via the WhatsApp application to Facebook and therefore onto the rest of the internet, because we know how good Facebook's track record is of keeping your private information safe. In fact, there's an entire website called Have I Been Zucked, as in Mark Zuckerberg, where you can actually go and check to see what of your private information has been exposed via a Facebook data breach. So if you're interested, go and check Have I Been Zucked. It's a play on the website Have I Been Pawned, where you can go and check to see if your private information and your email addresses have been exposed in online data breaches. So if you didn't know about those, I'd suggest you go to Have I Been Pawned and also Have I Been Zucked to go and see if your information's actually been leaked. But back on topic. Now, what happened with WhatsApp then is that a lot of people decided they didn't want to use WhatsApp because they didn't like it conceptually. They didn't like it based on the new terms of service or the company that operates it, and they decided they were going to jump ship and go to one of the other big competitors. The other big competitors being Telegram, who has just recently been bought out by Microsoft, and then also the open source project called Signal. PWNED. Is that pawned or porn? No, it's PWNED. It's a form of leet speak for being like owned or something like that. PWNED. So if you think about it, this is actually a very good discussion for what makes a good product or service, because a lot of us used WhatsApp as the de facto application because WhatsApp was it was really benefiting from the network effect, where if you knew someone, they were like 9 times out of 10 guaranteed to be on WhatsApp. Therefore, if you wanted to communicate with them, you say, hey, you want a WhatsApp? Boom. You're on WhatsApp, you talk to one another. And that is still the reason why most people are still making use of WhatsApp, because a lot of businesses make use of WhatsApp. A lots of organizations have already got infrastructure dedicated to utilizing WhatsApp, and it's just too costly or too tiresome or too much of a pain to move to something else. And also, if you move to something like Telegram, well, what's the guarantee that it won't get bought out by Microsoft? And then, well, is Microsoft any better than Facebook? Well, arguably yes, but also maybe not, because they do a lot of really questionable things when it comes to the way their operating systems work. So if you think about it from that perspective, you've got now 2 camps of people. The people who are like, oh, well, I don't care, I'm just going to stay on WhatsApp because all my friends and family are on WhatsApp. And then you've got the other group of people who are like, well, forget WhatsApp, we're going to go to insert competitor here and start making use of that. But then they get there only to find that their 3 out of their 20 friends are using Telegram, Signal, or one of their competitors, and the rest of the people who are ignorant and or don't care are still making use of WhatsApp. So, is WhatsApp a good product? Well, obviously it's a good product because millions upon millions of people use it. In fact, it's the number 4 most downloaded app in the world, still in March, after all of this happened. So just by the way, Facebook decided they were going to extend the deadline for those terms of service by 3 months. And I still have to hear if they're going to make any changes or anything based on that. But for now, it seems that the outrage has sort of simmered down and everyone is doing whatever, and most people back to not caring and are just using WhatsApp anyway. So Is it a good or bad product? Well, maybe it's a good product that's being mismanaged, because anytime you've got a product that is scaring away customers, you are doing something wrong with it. Whereas the guys over at Telegram got millions of new people. In fact, they had so many people that they couldn't keep the servers up and running because they just had such a massive influx of people. And they welcomed those people with open arms, obviously, because anything or any number of people that are joining their app over, say, the competition is good for them as a business. Okay, so what exactly makes the thing a good thing? What makes the product a good or bad product? Well, as we've seen by this, it could be the physical product in terms of the services that it offers. In fact, if you take like Telegram to WhatsApp side by side, Telegram has a lot more features than WhatsApp. It's just not used by as many people because most people started out using WhatsApp and are still using WhatsApp. And WhatsApp's development slowed. What's the need to innovate and create new tech if they are practically a monopoly? Whereas the smaller companies who are like, we don't have that market share, we need to innovate to get ahead. So what happens is they will then produce a better, more feature-rich product. They are also more likely to listen to people, their customers, in fact. Whereas Facebook is just like, well, we don't care. Whoa, no, okay, wait, maybe we do care because lots of people are leaving our application and there's a lot of negative press coming. So I think Facebook doesn't care about its people or its customers. Instead, Facebook actually cares about the negative press that they are getting, which could unsettle their investors and shareholders. So bring this all back into the context of tonight's lecture. We need to kind of evaluate what is a good product. So if we look at something like Wikipedia, how many of you think Wikipedia is your favorite website? You love going to Wikipedia. I can guess 9 out of 10 of you are going to say no. Well, maybe like 7 out of 7 of you are going to say, no, it's not my favorite website. Why would I ever go there? Because there is a need. There's a need. You want to understand something, you want to find out some information, but you don't want to go and do the heavy research. So instead, you go to a place that's done all the work for you. You go to the likes of Wikipedia. That's where the need in the product is. And that's why Wikipedia is by far the most utilized website on the internet. If we look at the other products or websites here, there's a need for each and every one of them. YouTube, entertainment, also looking for information, reviews. Those kind of things are very important because a lot of us have become far more informed consumers. So if I want to buy something, I will very often go and look at people unbox the item and then use it for a couple of weeks and then give some feedback on it so that you can get maybe a better understanding of the product, how it operates from someone else's perspective, so that you're not going to be getting the product and being completely ignorant to how it might actually effectively operate. You can see this with things like IMDb, which is responsible for listing movie information and ratings of movies. You've also got things like Yelp, which is also reviews, and then things like, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. And then you've got other things like Reddit, which is just general purpose sites where people can connect based on their interests and share information about their particular interest. So Reddit actually covers a very large base. There's often a subreddit for absolutely everything, from good things to bad things to in-between things to every kind of subdomain you could think of on the internet. So if you think about all of this, well, obviously there's Amazon there, so shopping. So we can see pretty much based on this kind of information that you can break down what the kind of products are that are most in use. Social media, finding information, writing reviews or checking other reviews about products, and then general purpose stuff like entertainment. So these things are obviously probably the most profitable and most marketable kinds of website-based products or application products available on the internet. So if we were to like generalize all of this, how could we do that? Well, how do we measure what an actual good product is? Do we look at like the features, how it performs? Is it reliable? Does it conform to standards? Is it going to be durable for a given period of time? Is it easy to use? Is there decent user support, etc.? Well, the answer is, well, it could be any combination of those. It could also be none of those, and some of the other ones on the other side, it could be something completely different. Every product is going to be subjective from the perspective of the person using it, but there's also going to need to be things that are objective about it. So things like conformance to standards, that kind of thing needs to be done objectively, whereas how people feel about a product is entirely subjective. But that does not make it any less or more of a good product. Some people would argue that WhatsApp is an inferior product to, say, Telegram, because WhatsApp has less features than Telegram. But objectively, WhatsApp is a better product than Telegram because it has more people making use of it. So you can see that the way that you measure this product is different from product to product. Ease of use I've actually listed twice here on the same line. It's by accident, but it's actually not by accident, because ease of use is one of those things that if there's a big barrier to entry, like let's say you want to buy a car and there's two cars on the market. The one is cheaper than the other one. Well, you might think, well, the cheaper one might sell better, but you might also hear that the cheaper one you have to assemble yourself. Now, the cheaper one has a lower price barrier to entry, but now has a skill barrier that you've got to be able to build this car yourself so that you can use it. Most people, myself included, do not have the ability to build cars, might not understand where all the parts go, and by the time you're done, if any of you have ever built something like a Lego set or something like that, you always got some parts left over. And if there's parts left over, there's generally probably something that's not going to work, or something that, well, if it does work, you're going to wonder why. So bear this in mind. When you talk about products, we need to kind of think about them and think about not just what the product is, but also what it does and what sort of niche it fulfills and who the product is going to be targeting. So if we look at products and how to develop them, we need to look at this process called product development as an actual process by which we identify what product it is we want to create. We design it, physically make it, market it so people will then make use of it and buy it so that we can hopefully reach the critical mass of people so that it becomes profitable. And then hopefully it will then benefit customers, or rather, we should be designing the product to benefit customers so that if we market it correctly, it should therefore be successful. Okay, so what do we do in product development? Well, product development could involve us actually improving existing products or improving the way they are perceived. We could give them new coats of paint, we could upgrade existing features, we could have new marketing campaigns. And all of this is going to be if we already have an existing working product. So think about the sneaker I talked about earlier. People have been buying sneakers for years. They change the color on the sneaker, they put a new label on the sneaker, they advertise a new feature on the sneaker, and people buy the sneakers. So that's an example of improving an existing product. Now, if we wanted to develop a new product, well, think about jet boots. Imagine people could go to space with just a pair of boots. Forget Elon Musk and SpaceX and going to space on SpaceX. You can just buy a pair of boots. I mean, that would be a revolutionary product. I'm sure someone would want to do that. But unfortunately, you got to make the product. You got to make sure the product works. You got to make sure it's safe. You got to make sure that people are going to want to use it and be able to afford it. So you've got to be able to target the product correctly. Now, ultimately, we're going to be talking about this from the perspective of when we develop the product, we're going to have to do it systematically. And what do I mean by systematic product development? Well, sometimes you've heard of something called a system development life cycle. Think back to Informatics 3 if you were in Informatics 3. And that was a process by which you developed software. But we're not just going to develop software. We want to develop a product. So think about the product development process as a sort of watered down version of the system development lifecycle, where you initially conceive the product, you then go about developing whatever you need to produce the product. Finally, you create the product in the realization step. Then you take it to market and you market it and you do all those things in the realization step. And then finally, you go about supporting the product and dealing with any problems that have arisen or bad batches or stuff like that. And then finally, once you're done, you retire the product if you no longer need to make use of it. So let's say there's a downtick in the number of people who are buying your particular brand of sneaker because the color is out of season or whatever. Then there's no need to continue producing the product if it's not going to continue to be profitable, at which point you retire the product. And hopefully throughout this entire process you've made profit, attracted new customers, those kind of things to keep the business moving forward and being profitable and usable. So ideally, you want an organization that can go from nothing to being an explosive success in no time flat. So let's talk about something like Facebook. Facebook was one of those phenomenons or black swan events that went through what is called a visionary launch, where there was no Facebook and then all of a sudden Facebook was just everywhere. So there's a question, what's the difference between develop and realize? So development is where you go through the stages required to produce the product. Realization is where you have now made the product and you want to bring it to market. So once you've got the product, you now need to get it into people's hands. So you go through the whole marketing stage, you go through the whole distribution stages, and ideally you want to get the product into people's hands. So if you think about it, when you conceive the product, you need to sort of develop the idea of what the product is going to be. You iron out all the designs that you need to have, make sure that you've got the right people and market targeted. Then once you've got a good idea of what it is you're going to be making, you go into development. And that's where you now need to get the staff, you need to now get the production lines in place, you need to source the material for your supply lines for those kind of things to happen. You need to make sure that you now start making the product, making sure that the quality is up to standard, and then once everything is up to standard and you can start producing the item en masse, you then move into the realization stage. Now you've got a product. Now you need to make it a product that is marketable. You need to now start doing the commerce side of things, where you exchange the product for monetary gain. So you sell it to people so that they can buy it. So this might mean you need to have distribution in place. So think about it, that development is like you need to get the tooling in place, you need to get the people in place. Realization is now you've made the product, you need to now get it into people's hands to get the money. And then when things go wrong, that's where support comes in. And finally, once no one wants the product anymore, you retire the product so you don't keep making it but at a loss. So ideally, every organization wants to benefit from like the Facebook effect, if you will. They want to create this new startup, they want to then release the product, and then what happens is you create the product, then one or two people like the product, they tell their friends, then everyone starts using the product, and it just keeps going and going and going. And Facebook, as you can see, is still, after many, many years, it is still one of the most popular services, websites, applications on the internet. So Facebook is still kind of like going and going and going. Maybe something will dethrone Facebook eventually and we'll no longer use it and we'll be using XYZ instead. But ultimately, that is like a 1 in 10, a 1 in 100 kind of event that takes place for a company to become that big overnight and continue to grow. Most companies will have slower adoption. They'll have less people coming in. Their products will be less successful, less profitable. And then maybe some other organization will see this other company and be like, well, we can see what they're doing wrong. Let us make our own product that's in competition to it, and then look, oh well, we did better than them because we understood the customer better, or we marketed better, or we targeted our markets better, sourced better materials, many different factors. So ideally what will happen is you want your organization to get to a point when it goes from nothing to getting to a peak of being adopted and used and bought. Most products, however, will not last forever. People won't buy the same product over and over and over and over and over again because someone will come along and innovate and make a better product, at which point your product will go into decline and people will stop using it. They will then move on to the better product, and that's where Facebook has kind of innovated to keep themselves alive. They went from just providing you with social media to then doing all sorts of other things, to communities, to having like online shops, etc. So Facebook had to keep innovating to keep people on the platform, to dissuade them from going to other competitors. So ultimately, when we think about this, most people would think that the big product development actually takes place between the development and realization phases, but not really the most important. The majority of the work happens between development and realization, but the most important work is actually going to happen in the conception and support stages, because at the conception stage you need to understand the customer to make sure that you are producing the right product. But also, if you've had existing products before, taking information from the support stage could allow you to feed that information into your next conception stage to enable you to effectively make a better product. And this is where listening and involving the customer is going to become one of the most key, important aspects of development. So that's why I say listening to customers is key to actually knowing what they want and what exactly it is that they need. But sometimes you can't just ask people what it is that they want. So Henry Ford once famously said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. At which point, back in time, Henry Ford was the founder of the Ford Motor Company. And before he invented the motor car or motorized carriage, people were riding around in horse-drawn carriages. So a car is actually a carriage, if you didn't know. And there was no concept of what a car was. There was no idea of having like a steam motor to drive you around personally. You could climb on a train, which was a very large, cumbersome process, or you could get driven around on a horse-drawn carriage. Steve Jobs also said something quite famously, that he said, it is not your customer's job to know what they want. So I'm not sure if that's condescending or if that is truly visionary, that you sometimes need to look at not just what your customers want or what they have in mind for what they want, but instead look at what could revolutionize the way certain things are done and the way that the processes involving your organization or an existing product can be revolutionized to produce an entirely new product, and then alert people to the fact that they need this product because they've been living their whole lives without it. And this is where we're going to start talking about how do we start up and get things running. So we're going to talk about a process called running lean. Now, running lean is a development concept that was developed by a person named Eric Ries. And it is aimed at producing a product in such a way that you build a successful product that is better, faster, to then identify what is a good product and also get rid of the bad ideas sooner. The problem a lot of organizations have is they have like maybe 3 ideas for a good product, and they don't get rid of the bad ideas fast enough, so they waste time and resources on them. So the way that we address this is we get the product to testing earlier. In particular, we get it to the customers so we can get real-time sort of feedback on the product, how people measure the product. Do they like the product? What they don't like about the product? What is their first instinct when they've got this new thing in front of them? And more so than just getting it to them early, we're instead going to engage the customer throughout the entire development process. In fact, we're going to take the whole process and make it into a cycle, because the information that comes out the end of the cycle can be very useful if fed back into the cycle for the next product. So what this will allow us to do is tackle both product and market validation at the same time. Do people like the product? Is the product going to be well accepted by the market? Now, if you want to, not obligatory, you can go ahead and look for the books on running lean and lean startup philosophy and read them. They're very interesting, but they're absolutely beyond the scope of this course. And with this concept in mind, we're going to lean into now lean startup philosophy. Now, lean startup philosophy is a philosophy built on this running lean principle, where it's going to be an approach that we are going to use in business to improve the success rate of the products that we are going to be creating, all by eliminating wasteful practices. So really, we're going to be driving this lean startup philosophy into streamlining the organization as well as the development life cycle of the product, so that we can eliminate wasteful activities. So have you ever seen one of these before, where you've got 3 different things and they ask you to choose 2? So you can have something cheap and good, but it's going to take a long time to develop. Do you want something good and fast? Well, then it's not going to be cheap. Do you want something that is cheap and fast? Well, then it's not going to be good. So the idea behind this lean startup philosophy is that you don't want to make sacrifices of one over the other. You want to incorporate as much as possible while eliminating as much of the wasteful things as possible. So we're going to be using agile software development for this, because agile is really geared towards getting out an early iteration of the product to get feedback, so that you can then feed that feedback back into the product development to produce a better product. Now, this is actually built upon what is called the Toyota Production System. And the Toyota Production System is a socio-technical system that was developed by Toyota that was designed to encompass the way that they handle their management philosophies as well as their management practices, so that when they actually go to develop a product, their manufacturing and logistics, as well as the interactions with suppliers and customers, are all factored into the process to produce the highest quality product possible. So lean startup philosophy actually also incorporates something called bootstrapping, where you get something up and going fast. So bootstrapping comes from the term to strap your boots. So in the before times when we had shoes and we had to wear them out the house, you would have to tie your shoelaces, and tying your shoelaces took a lot of time. So if you were ever in, say, a military engagement and you needed to get out of your bed into your combat boots and engage the enemy, tying your shoelaces would take an unnecessarily long amount of time. So that's why you could put straps on your boots that had Velcro, that you could just jump into your boots, strap them, and off you go. And it'll take you a fraction of the time to achieve the same outcome as if you had sat there tying your shoelaces. Your boots were affixed to your feet, you did it faster. And thus the term bootstrapping has been born, and now we look at it as a concept of bringing something to a state where it is usable as quickly as possible. And finally, the thing we're going to incorporate in Lean Startup philosophy is customer development, where you want to incorporate the customer into the development process. Now, we've talked about the role of the customer a lot, that the customer is important. The customer needs to be thought of when designing the product. So why not get the feedback of the customer that you're designing the product for, so that you can determine if you're making the right product or if you've missed the mark entirely. So think about things like focus groups and having early screenings to gauge the way that people feel about movies. Those kind of things are all involving customers in the development process. So Lean Startup philosophy is all about get rid of the waste, be efficient, without being cheap. You don't need to produce a rubbish product cheaply. You can produce a reasonably good product efficiently. That's what it's going to be about. We need to be optimizing time so that we can get the product out without spending time waiting on things, wasting time. So our main objective when we talk about Lean Startup philosophy is we want to maximize the way that we learn, because when we learn as an organization about the product, about the customer, we are then more inclined to produce a better product that is better tailored to that particular customer. Therefore, we're going to be talking about customer development. So, customer development. And how does it actually get into this process of Lean Startup philosophy? Well, customer development was a term coined by Steve Blank, who founded multiple different startup companies, of which 4 of them went public, which means they're actually actively traded on the stock exchange. Now, customer development was something that he focused on in his organizations, and it was described as the parallel process of building a continuous feedback loop with the customers being present throughout the product development lifecycle. So he envisioned it to be something like this, where your product development was not a straight line, where you'd have, we're going to want to build a product, we're going to then produce it, realize it, etc., and then retire it, we're done. Instead, the product development lifecycle was actually built in a cyclic nature, where you would build a product, measure the acceptance of the product to see what kind of information you can learn from the measurements, and then take that what you've learned from that to then improve the next stage of development. So if you just built one product, you could then build the initial product, release it to the customers, get some measurements on how they feel about it, get some feedback, analyze that to learn something about what you need to do, and then apply it by creating a new iteration of the product. Doesn't this sound a lot like sort of agile software development? Because in essence, it really is. So in terms of developing products, what we ideally want to do is merge product development and this customer-centric development process into one system effectively. And actually, it's pretty much agile development, because if we look at it, you're in essence going to have customer development where you have customer discovery, where you discover what it is you want to be producing based on what your customer's needs are. You then get it validated by the customer. So you take this idea to the customer then says, that's a bad idea, I don't want that. Who would ever want that in their lives? Or they'd say, yes, we want the product. And you go through rounds of this iteration where you figure out what exactly it is you want to produce. Once you've produced it, you then produce the product, and then you make sure that the customers are happy with the created product, and then you scale your company up to then start producing the product. Once you know you've got a solid idea for the product and you've got the production lines in place, then you can start actually going into development. And this is where agile software development comes in if you're producing a software product. And one of the outcomes of agile software development is that it is in and of itself a feedback loop. And that feedback loop will be producing a lot of data. That data and feedback from the customers can all be brought back into the customer development process. And that ensures that the development of the product is not separate from the customer's and the customer development cycle that is necessary to produce the product. So at stages of Agile, you're still going to be producing iterations of the product and releasing it for testing and feedback. But when we think about it from this perspective, this is only when you're producing the product. Now we're producing X component. Does the customer like it? Yes, no. Feedback, change the development, get whatever the next stage of the development is. What we are wanting to do here is ensure that through customer development, we are producing the right product from the start so that we don't waste agile iterations on a product that has no business actually being produced. So if you think about it, customer development is designed to vet the ideas far faster so that you don't have to wind up developing things that will ultimately fail. Instead, you scrap those ideas in these early stages so that they never actually go into development. And therefore, you don't waste resources and time and effort and infrastructure and money producing things that have no business actually being produced. Instead, you vet your ideas sooner, build the product, and then once you've got some insight from the product, feed it back into the customer development cycle, and then maybe you can extract more insights that can be fed back into the agile loop. So they're not intertwined into one, they are still separate, but they still form a cyclic process, which is still a feedback loop that we are producing. So this is how we think about agile development, but from a customer-driven perspective, that we're going to then be trying to get this whole kind of system or product that we're producing built as efficiently as possible, but also we're not going to waste time making every iteration of the product and only selecting the best ones. Instead, we want to get rid of the ones that are not the best earlier on so we don't waste time and resources on them. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I have nothing else for you tonight. I hope this has at least inspired you to think about product development a little bit differently, and a little bit differently about how you think about what exactly a product is. So as an exercise, next time you're in a shopping mall or you're out doing some grocery, look at products and ask the question, what is the product's purpose? What is the market that they're going to be aiming for? And what would satisfy a customer about this particular product? And that's an important exercise when looking at things. Because if you look at products from this perspective of what is its purpose, you can understand a little bit more about what the product is supposed to be used for, what the product is doing on the market, and what kind of niche it's going to be filling. And that will give you then insight into how you could possibly develop other better products that could be used to compete or could be used as an alternative, for instance. Okay, so if you do have any questions, please do post them in the chat. I'll hang around for a minute or two. If you do not wish to ask them, or you haven't formulated your question in a minute or two, please do ask on the Discord server as per usual. And also just a reminder, there is the extension on the main research project. It is extended to the 18th of May because the week after the 6th, that particular day is a public holiday. So good luck to you. However, after the 18th, I can't accept any more submissions. There would just not be enough time for me to mark them and put them through Turnitin. Also, on the added side note, the bad news from today, I haven't been able to release your marks to you for your mini research projects because they're still going through Turnitin they still need to go through Turnitin because Turnitin has been down for quite some time for whatever reason. Prof. Underhaar has assured me that they will go through as soon as he has been informed that the Turnitin service is back online for use by the Academy. Okay, I don't see any questions, but I will hang around for a minute just in case you want to ask any questions. But if not, thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something, and have a great evening. Oh, also, bear in mind, next week, Tuesday, is the 27th, which is Freedom Day. So there is no class next week, Tuesday. So please don't expect to see me online. Please instead use the time to work on your research project. Thank you all. Have a good evening, and I will see you then in 2 weeks' time. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so please do post them in the Discord server if you have them. Have a great evening.